Honestly, I was realizing at this point that back in 2016, I had dementia. This wasn't just old age.
Mary, how did you find carnivore?
I found Carnivore when I started a health coaching course. Up until that point, I had been ketogenic, and I had started a ketogenic diet as a backup plan for medication for narcolepsy. And that was in 2016. I was at a crossroads where I had run out of medications to help me, and I was falling asleep every 2 hours. I was on high doses of antidepressants, stimulants, anti-anxiety meds, struggling just to survive. And I had gone back to a sleep med doctor. She switched me to a completely different medication. But in doing so, this was a tightly controlled medication. And she took me off everything, not the antidepressants, but took me off the stimulants. And I was like, oh my gosh, even though this medication helped me sleep, I was still just dying, not literally, but figuratively, to function during the day. And in doing some reading, I'd run across some information about a ketogenic diet being beneficial for people with narcolepsy. So I was like, what the heck, I'll try it. So within a matter of a week, the magic happened, and I was just like, wow. So there was a lot of discovery between 2016 and 2021 when I found Carnivore. But like I said, I had taken this health coaching course, and I thought, well, if I'm going to coach on this, I need to experience it and just see what this is all about. Because up until that point, I felt like I had to have my vegetables to be healthy. Well, I started the carnivore diet, and I was like, wow, first off, this is simple. I have one thing to worry about. I can throw it in the air fryer and I'm done. So that was kind of neat. Well, then again, within a month or so of starting this, one of my biggest problems that I was having, I had really gotten off not all my medications. I'd gotten off the major medications. I still have to take medication for thyroid, and I still take a nighttime medicine for the narcolepsy. But I'd gotten off, I'd lost the weight, my blood pressure had normalized, asthma had gone away, all the things. That was calm. The one thing I had not gotten back was my long-term memory. I had, again, when I started keto, memory was a problem, but I started redeveloping, I guess you could say. I started having better focus, better memory, and I was making memories, if that makes sense. So I could remember what had happened in my past up until 2016. But I had no recollection of my childhood. I had no recollection of my children's childhood. And in 2019, this became a, a big deal to me. I was just like, okay, something's not right. And so I mentioned it to a couple doctors. And the answer was, you're just getting older. It's normal. There's nothing we can do about it. So my rationale was, you know what? I have my arms, my hands, my feet, my legs. I can hear, I can see. I've got pictures. I can go back and look. I may not remember, but I can look and see that this happened. So, you practice gratitude for what you got and you keep moving forward. So starting carnivore, I started having these little flashes of memory. And I said to my children, who are adults, I said, I'm going to share these snippets with you. But I said, I don't want you to tell me anymore. Just tell me if I'm right or tell me if I'm wrong. Because if I'm wrong, I'm going to let it go. But if I'm right, I'm going to see if I can hold on to it. So with increasing regularity, what I was recalling was correct. So my test for whether this was real or not was, could I think about this in a day, in an hour, in a day, in a week, and remember it? And if I could, then that meant something was happening that I couldn't really explain. And when I would mention it, I didn't really talk to doctors about this because I'm the kind of person that if the doctor tells me it can't happen, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not going to mention it again. But then I was starting to slowly get more and more pieces of the stories. And I would come back to my kids and say, okay, this is part of the story. Yeah, it's part of the story. And so then I wanted to know what was happening. Because again, I had been told this couldn't happen. And honestly, I was realizing at this point that back in 2016, I had dementia. This wasn't just old age, 52 at the time, which is what I was told, the old joke of CRS. You just have CRS. And I started realizing something was happening. And so I stuck with keto, not with keto, but I stuck with carnivore because couldn't explain it. But I wanted more. I wanted like the reality that I could sit down with my grandchildren one day and tell them a story about their mom or tell them a story about me or their grandmom. You don't realize when you lose that ability how precious it is. And I remember I had a nurse one time tell me, well, just make up something. I'm like, but you want me to make up something that I can't remember? So how am I supposed to remember what I made up? And so that doesn't sound like a real good idea. But so anyway, yeah, just piece by piece, things started coming back and finished up this health coaching course. I had a lot of questions when I was done with this course and enough questions that I wasn't willing to go in practice at that point. And I spent a year just kind of researching this. There is no research. There is no research on people recovering their memories. There's research from traumatic head injuries, but there is no research on somebody like me who was on high doses of all kinds of medications that are known to impact memory, who is coming from a place of sleep deficit, of decades of sleep deficit. And I'll go back and cover that. There's nothing out there. So I really was kind of on my own and savoring every moment. That every time I had a memory, it was just like, oh my gosh. And I remember, again, talking to this nurse practitioner back in 2016. I asked her, I said, what is a memory? And she looked at me. She's like, what do you mean? I said, what is a memory? Is it something that you feel? Is it something that you see? What is it? And she had no idea what I was talking about. And I can kind of see that. I think if somebody asked me what's memory, I could totally define it. But I think for the average person, if somebody said, explain to me what a memory is, they might have a hard time quantifying what it is. But a memory is a feeling. It elicits emotion, or it's a little bit of a picture. You kind of see the surroundings. Maybe it's not clear, but you can see them. And it just makes you feel. It makes you feel sad. It makes you feel happy. It makes you feel relieved. And so I was starting, as these memories were coming back, I was starting to like have feelings with them. And so I knew that that was real, that something magical was happening. And then, like I said, bit by bit, more and more was coming back. And I was so excited. And I savored these. It wasn't anything I could go and say, hey, guess what's happening? I just savored them. But one day, the day that I knew this was legit was I was somewhere, music was playing overhead, and I heard a song come on that I had not heard in decades. Now I'm going to say, when I was younger, I was Barry Manilow, Captain and Tennille, Little River Band, all the little soft stuff. So when I heard this song and it popped in my head and I saw the band, I was like, okay, this is it. This is real. We are making progress. We are healing. It was Bad Company. It was Shooting Star. Listen to Bad Company. They were too hard rock for me. And I was like, oh my lands. And so I wasn't in a place where I could go check it out. But it was a challenge. Can I remember this long enough to get somewhere where I can go look this up? And I had in my head kind of like the band was, and it was a 4-member band, and one of them had long hair. And Anyway, as soon as I could get to a computer to go look it up and look up the lyrics, I was like, God, this is amazing. And that's when I knew there's something magical about just eating a carnivore diet. And, to this day, memories are still coming back. Like I said, I spent about a year listening to Dr. Berry, Dr. Boz. I think Dr. Chafee was out by that point. Anybody who was big in the space, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. And trying to understand, again, when I came out of this program was heavier protein, was higher protein and less fat. And I went that route for a little bit and digressed. I didn't feel as good. When I flipped back to high fat, I was like, that's where we need to be. So, anyway, so after that, after about 9 months or so, I realized I needed to go back, find a different program that was more inclusive or less inclusive. And I ended up going to Primal Health and taking their program. And I ended up taking a gut microbiome course through them, which really answered a lot of questions about what was happening. There's a book that I've read that I think is super interesting. And it's this book, Evolve Your Brain. Fascinating read. And he talks about how memory is created. And because again, I was just trying to understand this. And basically it's synapses reconnecting. And I think he said in this book, and I've seen other places, people say that now it's not that you lose your memory, it's that you lose those connections that connects your hippocampus to the other parts of your brain. And so I think that I wondered if I started off with carnivore, would that part have been faster? Who knows? I think the brain is complex enough, and I think that I was ill enough that it really just took 5 years for enough healing to occur that component could come together. My narcolepsy, I think, started in early childhood. Typically, I have narcolepsy with cataplexy, which is genetic. So when I look back, I can see as a young child where I was having symptoms, but I was too young to articulate this. And it was just, I was the fourth child, and it was just like, you just don't get the same attention as the fourth child. That's not a slam on my parents. It's just reality. So I was just kind of this grumpy little kid that everybody was like, well, it's because you're the last one. You've always got your way. And then, puberty hit and hormones hit. And with narcolepsy, I guess I haven't really explained that too well. With narcolepsy, you lose function of some cells in your brain called orexin. They're in your brain and your gut, and they control your sleep-wake cycle. And so much like the cells of a type 1 diabetic are attacked and they die off, that's what happens with somebody with narcolepsy. And so these cells, which control staying awake and falling asleep, once they're gone, you're just at the whim of glucose at that point. And so they say you can fall asleep anytime, anywhere. I say I can fall asleep with enough glucose. So if I would eat something sugary, I would have that high, like that burst of energy. And then as the insulin hit and knocked my glucose back down, I'm out like light. I did not realize that as a young child. I didn't really realize that until after I went keto. But that was my entire life. I would eat sugary. I would get, high as a kite, and then I would crash. And if I couldn't go to sleep, I was mean. Anybody's mean. When you're tired, anybody's mean. So, but yeah, so that was kind of my life. And so, of course, puberty hits. You've got the hormones on top of the sleep deprivation. Again, let me cover this a little bit better. Not only do you lose the function of those cells, you also lose the ability to get deep restorative sleep. So probably from childhood on, I would go to sleep and then I would wake up. And again, I remember that I would wake up all throughout the night, and I never understood it. And it was always blamed on, well, you've gone to bed too late, or you're drinking too much soda, or there was always an explanation for it. And so I just you just cope. You just cope. And so, again, got through my teenage years. It was rough, but I got through. I went to college. In college is when I think it got worse. In my freshman year, came home for Christmas and mono was going around, and I had caught it, so they thought. I would, my family, my parents and I took a trip down to Savannah, Georgia. It was an 8-hour trip. Got in the car that morning. I slept the entire way down to Savannah. And then the whole time we were down in Savannah, I just kept falling asleep. And I can remember, like, I would hear people talking, but I couldn't wake up. All the way home, I slept. We got home. I was working a part-time job, so I would go to work from like 3 in the afternoon till 9 at night. Come home, my mom would fix me dinner. And I'd fall asleep at the table. I'd just push my plate aside and fall asleep. And my mom, God love her, she would sit there, their face in my face saying, Mary, you got to wake up. You got to eat. I was a little thing, 4'10", but when I graduated high school, I was 85 pounds. So there wasn't a lot of weight to lose. So my mom would sit there and she would hold her hand on my head and she would talk me through eating. And then I would go to bed. And I remember there was a discussion with my dad. She's like telling my dad something's wrong. And my dad's like, she's finally growing. I'm 18. I'm not growing. But that was the rationale that my dad had. Went back to college. One of my professors tapped me on the shoulder at the end of class. He said, go to the infirmary. Something's wrong. So I went to the infirmary and they were like, okay, you're either pregnant or you have mono. Well, I was not pregnant. And mono titer was negative. But I had all the symptoms, meaning I was tired. That was the only symptom I had. Talked to our family doctor, and he's like, well, maybe you just got past it. So we really just went on that assumption. So for like the next 6 months, I'm just trying to come out of this. My gut feeling is that may have just been when things notched up a little bit. Nevertheless, again, you learn to cope, you learn to deal with it. Got through college, got out in the working world. My degree was in health information. I was working office jobs, filing all kinds of things in charts. So you can imagine how well this goes. So I start job hopping at this point because I'm just not performing like I should. And finally, my mother, always my advocate, found a local GYN who was kind of ahead of the game, and that I was diagnosed with PMS, and that the assumption was that my hormones were out of whack, which he really wasn't far off. Yes, they were totally out of whack. So he gave me some progesterone to use, and he told me to go on a sugar-free diet. And man, that changed my life. I really had a bunch of, several good years. But in this time period, my mother fell ill to cancer, and we lost her to that. I got married. We moved in a new home. I got pregnant. I had a baby. And then I had like the year anniversary of my mom's passing. The whole sugar-free business went out the window the day I got pregnant. Like, never thought about it again. And so after I had this baby, I was dead. I was so tired and I didn't understand what's going on. And really, my dad's an amazing guy, but he was not involved in this, so he couldn't really speak to it. So anyway, I just kind of muddled through the next couple of years, had some problems with secondary infertility. And then they discovered that I had Hashimoto's. So my doctor was like, okay, well, that's why you're tired. So started me on thyroid replacement therapy, and I still was exhausted. Still couldn't carry a baby to term. We adopted in 2000. And I had both of my children in the car with me, and I was coming back from Greenville, which was about an hour and a half from where I lived. And there's a section where you veer off from one interstate system to another, and I fell asleep. And I woke up in the median with my 6-year-old shoulder shaking, sobbing, Mommy, please talk to me. Say something, Mommy, please. And I remember hearing her, and I could not open my eyes. When I finally got my eyes open, I just looked at her, and I was just like, dear God, what just happened? I didn't get hit. I didn't hit anybody. And ironically, nobody even stopped to check on us. And thank goodness it was a huge median. So, and it was a lot of bumpy grass. So I pulled back on the road. I did pull off to call somebody to come help, and I couldn't find anybody to help. And my daughter was just like, I don't want to stay in the car with you. And I'm like, I get that. I don't want to be in the car with me either. But here we are. So we got home safely. I called my doctor's office that afternoon, and I said, I need to come in. Went in to go see him. I'm like, okay, this is not Mommy tired. This is not Mommy of 2 kids tired. This is not Mommy who's working a full-time career tired. This is not Mommy with Hashimoto's tired. I said, something's wrong, and we need to figure this out today. So he sent me to sleep medicine, and then 2 months later, I got the diagnosis of narcolepsy with cataplexy. And so I was like, okay, cool. This is fantastic. I have my answer. I'm going to have my drugs, and we are good to go. And ironically, I don't think my family believed it, because it is a rare disorder. And so what I thought was an answered prayer wasn't, because at this point now I'm on antidepressants to keep the cataplexy minimum. What is cataplexy? I don't think I've covered that either. Cataplexy is an involuntary loss of muscle control. So for some people, and sometimes for me, it was total loss of body control, where I would just completely collapse. Usually is associated with strong emotions. A lot of times for me, that was just dropping things. So I would drop plates. I still have the set of plates from when we got married, but we're missing a lot. So, but yeah, I would drop plates, just drop keys, and it's like I would pick them up and I drop them. I would stumble. I tripped a lot. It was never anything where like I fell on my face. Klutzy. I was basically called klutzy, but it turns out it was cataplexy. So the antidepressant was supposed to keep that at bay. I was on 2 different stimulants, a long-acting one that I would take during the day, and then a short-acting one to sort of get me through the nights, or if that wasn't enough. What else? They had me on, ironically, sleeping meds with the goal to try to keep me sleeping. Of course, with all the addition of this medication, I started gaining weight. And as I started gaining weight, more problems started happening. I was having problems with asthma after my daughter was born. So now I was on chronic medications for asthma. Of course, my blood pressure started going up. So I started getting on medications for blood pressure. And the next 16 years was just a disaster. I just slowly rolled down that hill, lost my career because I just couldn't keep up. Marriage fell apart because my husband was just like, I can't do this. Then, of course, when we got divorced, again, jobs were hard for me. And so I lost my home. And like I said, by 2016, I was destitute. And under the care of mental health, because at this point, I think about 2013, when I had to go on Medicaid, which in the United States is state insurance, state-sponsored insurance. My family doctor that I'd had for decades farmed me out. I'm assuming it was office policy that when a patient got on Medicaid, you could only treat a very narrow thing. So I got sent to mental health, and of course, mental health didn't recognize the narcolepsy. They apparently couldn't even refer me out to get reevaluated for that. And so they just started adding more meds, and I just started slipping. In 2016, I finally got private insurance again, and the nurse practitioner that I was seeing at the mental health center said, please go back to sleep med. She said, there's a drug they can prescribe for you that I can't prescribe. So I went back. to my sleep medicine office and met with a new doctor. And she looked at my chart and she said, "Your case is one of the most profound I've seen in my career." She said, "I've never seen somebody this far gone." I don't think far gone was the word she used, but this serious. And so she told me about this medication. And I was excited when I left. I was like, okay, and she explained the whole sleep deprivation. She said, I think at this point you are just so sleep deprived that you can't function. She's like, we weren't made to be sleep deprived. And so I had to wait a couple of weeks for this medication. But I started it in the beginning of, about the middle of April. And it was amazing. Like it's a very low dose that you start off with. You have to titrate up. And you're not supposed to have a response to like the first couple doses, but that night I slept like crazy and I woke up like on my own. Whereas in the past, I would have to wake up and take a Ritalin or something and then go back to sleep. And then I would wake up when the Ritalin hit my brain. I woke up and I was like, this is weird. This is weird. Like, and I could not go back to sleep. That was weird. And so I got up, and at this point I'd taken a leave of absence from work. Because like I said, when I started this medication, she pulled all the stimulants. So I remember telling my daughter one day, because I started watching The Amazing Race on Hulu, like the old episodes, because I was starting to challenge myself now. I wanted to see what I could remember, see if I could remember, because a lot of times I could watch a show and I could watch a show 5 times and I couldn't tell you that I was watching it again. So it was kind of a challenge, first off, just to see if I could keep up with it. So anyway, I remember telling my daughter one of those days, I said, I had no idea how long a day was. This was the first time that I could remember that I hadn't slept through the day or slept throughout the day. So that's kind of where we started. And then, like I said, after about a month on this medication, it's sodium oxybate. There's three different kinds. Well, 2 different kinds, Xyrem and Xywav. But after about a month on this, I was like, okay, this is amazing, but it's expensive. And if I lose my job, because at this point I'm on a leave of absence and I don't know if they're going to let me come back because I'm going to need serious restrictions to be able to function, I need a backup plan. And so that's when I learned about keto. So between keto and this medication, I found a wakefulness I'd never known. In fact, I didn't realize I was missing it, if that even makes sense. And so I just kept moving forward. And like I said, initially keto was my backup plan in case I lost the medication. But after about a month, I really had to make a decision because I couldn't really titrate up anymore on this medication because it was getting too strong. It was making me sick. And so I ran into my first confrontation with my doctor because she's like, no, we need to titrate up to get the effectiveness. And mind you, this is a lady who said this is the worst case I've ever seen. So in her mind, I'm going to have to go on the highest dose possible. And I'm telling her, if I if I take too much, I'm nauseated and I feel terrible. And she was like, well, stop the keto diet and go back to your regular diet. And I'm like, no, why would I do that? I don't, and she was like, why wouldn't you? And I'm like, because I don't want to. I said, I'm having success with this and it's my backup plan. And so basically we kind of reached a crossroads or a truce where she's like, okay, you do what you want to do. I don't support it, but you do what you want to do. So I'm like, okay. So I just kind of titrated up a little bit and I stayed at that dose and I kept doing keto. And then in that first year, I lost all my weight. I came off my blood pressure medications, came off my asthma medications, came off the anxiety medications. The anxiety was gone. I still was on the antidepressant because this medication at the higher dose impacts that. So it does, it does cause depression. And again, my doctor wasn't convinced that keto was going to do it. And she's like, well, I'm concerned that your cataplexy is going to come back. And I'm like, but I'm not tripping everything. So I'm like, I can walk now and not trip. I don't even know how to explain it. I I wasn't tripping. I could walk and not fall. Um, I mean, I have fallen down steps. I have tripped over potholes in the road, fallen on my face. I've fallen at work, and it was just really weird. But anyway, so I started titrating down on the medication as I started getting more acclimated to the keto. And my plan in 2016 was in 2019 to try to get long-term disability. It was that bad. Like at this job that I was at, it's a packing center, and the only thing that I could do there was to move packages from one belt system to another. Did that in 2016. That's all I could safely do. By 2019, I had been moved out of that role into more of a traditional role there. But as I started thinking about, okay, I need to contact an attorney to apply for long-term disability, I realized I no longer qualified. I wasn't perfect, but I was employable. So I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. You know, maybe I'm not gonna. Maybe there's something. Maybe I've got some life left in me. And then, like I said, by 2021, I decided I'm in a narcolepsy group and kind of will, help out here and there. But I felt like if I got a health coaching certification, I would at least have a little bit of authority, I guess, because some people are still really skeptical. Like, who are you to talk about this? And so I felt like if I had a little bit of that training, I could sort of understand and explain things a little bit better to help other people be more convinced that they had control over their life, just like I'd gotten control over my life. So I did, like I said, did that course and then tried the carnivore. And then I was like, wow, this is insane. This is crazy. And so, yeah, it's just been amazing the last 3 years, the recovery in my mind, the ability to be able to just remember my mom. Like I couldn't remember I couldn't remember my mother. It was just crazy. So yeah, so that's where I am, and just work with other people, with narcolepsy who are wanting to try to reclaim control of their life. So
Wow, what a journey. I mean, congratulations.
thank you.
This it's the thing that strikes me is like this has gone on basically your whole life, and it's only in the last few years that you've got to the solution.
Mhm.
It's yeah,
My
it's
hope and
it.
prayer is that I have another 40 years so that I can
Mm,
make up to my children what I couldn't do for them when they were younger because I slept a lot. Um,
yeah,
and just,
it must be like being reborn almost.
it is, it is. And I talk about my children, but also I want to be able to get the word out to other people that narcolepsy is, like a lot of these other autoimmune conditions, a carbohydrate problem. I don't get rid of it. This hasn't cured me. Because trust me, a bag of cotton candy and I'm out for 2 hours. Boom, we're done. Don't even talk to me. I can take myself out real quickly. But by eating meat, I do incorporate a few carbohydrates. I eat some peanuts. I eat a piece of fruit each day. Eat the fruit when I take my thyroid med because apparently vitamin C helps the body absorb the thyroid med better. So always, rather than taking vitamin C, I just eat a little tiny mandarin orange. I think it's so important that people understand this, that you don't have to be a victim to your circumstance. And I heard something today. It was actually Robert F. Kennedy talking about this in an interview, that he actually mentioned narcolepsy and MS and a lot of these other autoimmune diseases were not around until we started getting the processed foods. They were unheard of. And that with the advent of
Mhm.
processed foods.
Yeah, so why do you think that science or doctors don't really realize this about narcolepsy? Is it because narcolepsy is not so common, or?
It's not common, but I think it's probably for the same reason that they don't recognize it for a lot of other things. There's a lot of money in keeping patients on. It's probably not the right thing to say, but it's my opinion. There's a lot of money keeping patients on stimulants, antidepressants, sleeping meds, and then you're going to develop metabolic illness. And of course, these meds are going to cause dementia. There's a lot of money in that. This particular medication that I take, I should have calculated it up, but I didn't to find out the recent price. But 7 years ago when I calculated it, it was $65 a gram. And the average person takes anywhere between 6 to 9 grams a night.
This is the one that was helping you sleep.
Yeah, it's expensive.
That's great. That's hundreds of dollars a day.
It's thousands, like 20,000 a month or more. And that's why I was like, well, I can't depend on this as my sole thing. I take a very, very low dose, so I think I stay off the radar with my insurance company. But yeah, there are some people that is $20,000. They don't pay for it, and the insurance pays for it. But yeah, it's crazy expensive, and it's the only medication out there. There is another medication called baclofen that some people can use off-label that does help with sleep architecture. So some people have had success with that if they can't tolerate the Xyrem or they can't access it. But yeah, so that was the whole reason that I started the ketogenic diet was I need this backup plan. And then when I realized it worked, I was like, okay. And I still take the medication. I've tried coming off of it and not quite there yet. So
right.
Maybe
it's just a process. Yeah.
It's a process, and I really, it's not approved in Australia. And so when I started digging deep into why, because I'm always suspicious about when something's approved in the US, but it's not approved anyplace else. Apparently it has some addictive qualities to it. So I'm mindful of that. And it is super hard for somebody who's been on it to be able to get to sleep on their own without it. So, I try as much as I can to let my body start the sleep process. So I try to fix things at night so that I'm limiting my exposure to blue light, that I'm getting the red light in the evening, and trying to get my body to produce the melatonin and all the good stuff to help me feel sleepy. And then that way I can keep that dose as low as possible. So, yeah.
And so how are you eating day to day?
Eating day to day, I have in the mornings, I have my breakfast, which is usually about 4 eggs and some sausage. I do drink coffee. I put an egg in my coffee rather than putting like creamers. So I froth up an egg and I dump that in my coffee. So it's a protein coffee. Coffee is not hot enough to cook it, but it's hot enough to kill off any bacteria. I have done this since 2018 and I've never had a problem with it. So usually I'll have 2 to 3 coffees a day. So, two or 3 more eggs throughout the day. Lunch, I will have a lean meat and then I'll have a hamburger patty. So I try to make sure I'm always having something fatty. Beef here for my budget is crazy expensive. So I don't really buy the other cuts of beef right now. So I just, like I said, I do pork. I didn't say that, but I do pork and chicken. So I'll alternate pork or chicken. Drumsticks, that's the fattier chicken. What else do I do? But anyway, I'll do a fatty meat and a lean meat, usually for lunch. And then I'm trying for dinner just to do like a light, kind of tap me off for the end of the day. I do make fat bombs. So whereas they're supposed to be like these little tiny things that you use, I use like a muffin tray, and I'll make a decent sized one. And usually I take cream cheese and butter and some urethol and some electrolytes and add it all in there and just, I've actually started, I should say this, I actually started adding egg to it just to give it a little more because I was adding water to it. But I was like, well, that's kind of useless because I put them in the freezer. And so when I added water to them, it was like trying to chew a piece of ice. So I debated, I tried a couple different things. I didn't really like the heavy whipping cream in it. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to try the egg. And the eggs work. So I add the eggs to it and I freeze these. And then if I am starting to feel sluggish and I'm running out of energy, I will go eat one of those. And usually within about 10 minutes, brain lights back up. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah. So,
Yeah. So, how have your kids reacted to this? They can obviously see the changes in you, with the kind of memory tests and stuff, right?
yeah. They're glad to see it, but they're like, you eat weird. I'm not eating like that. So, I think my daughter said to me one day, she's like, I don't know what to feed you. And I looked at her, I'm like, hamburger? That's that. Hamburger. That's it. It's, yeah. But yeah, no, um, they're glad to see it. My daughter at 2016 was getting ready to get married and was considering placement in a residential care facility for me. She was not, she was that insecure. She didn't tell me till later. She was that concerned that I couldn't live on my own. So yeah, it was like when I would drive to her house, even after I started keto, and like I said, I still was struggling with my memory, but it was better. Before I would leave, she would call and say, okay, you plugged in my address. She's like, I'm going to follow you. That way, if you get lost, I'm going to follow you on GPS. If you get lost, I know where you are. And so really for me it was a milestone the day I actually drove down because she lives an hour from me. The day I drove down and I turned off the GPS just to see if I could get there. So she was mad at me.
Yeah, I can imagine that would have been a little bit stressful suddenly seeing the signal disappear, right?
She was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't want to see it. I want to see if I can do this. So yeah, that was just, it was a big deal. And then there are going to be some people that are going to say, why in the world were you even driving? Because nobody asked me. Nobody ever said, can you drive without assistance? So in my mind, that wasn't a big deal. Everybody used GPS to get around, right? Nobody ever said anything. It was only later I was like, man, maybe that was bad. Maybe I but yeah, it was the one thing I can say about this experience is that no matter whether I can't speak for somebody with Alzheimer's, but I'm going to say for anybody with memory issues, don't ever assume they don't know what's going on because chances are they know exactly what's going on. But it's like there's this invisible wall so that thoughts can't get out and words can't get in. And so I got to a point where I would read body language. So if I didn't really understand what somebody was saying, in order to decide whether I was going to try to convey to them that I didn't know what they were saying, I would look at their body language. And it's really interesting when you can't, it's interesting how the body senses take over when you lose one ability. So when you lose that ability to communicate, you start paying attention to body language. And I mean, everybody knows this if you're looking at a crowd from a distance and you can see in the distance somebody's looking some kind of way. You can be like, okay, there's a problem over there, or hey, look at that, something really amazing happened. And so I started really kind of shutting down around people that like that. And even my healthcare providers, my physician that I left, he would start coming in the room like this. I'm like, well, let's get out of here. But yeah, I was going to say, don't ever assume that they don't know what's going on. Don't ever pretend like they're having a hard time communicating. I think that if somebody could have just sat down and said, I see that you're really struggling to communicate, and let's figure out what's going on, man, that would have been great. But by the same token, I'm also grateful that nobody realized it, because at that time, they probably would have put me on a bunch of medications, and I probably would have just faded out in the abyss.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, the harder road traveled kind of means you've got a better result at the in the end, right? Mm.
Yeah, I think, and I do think about that a lot. I'm so grateful that either nobody really noticed, or I did such a good job at shutting down that nobody could really notice. Because I think about at the sleep med doctor's office, they have you fill out the survey that asks about when you fall asleep. The thing about it is, when you fall with narcolepsy, when you fall asleep, you don't realize you've fallen asleep. You don't realize you've lost that time. And so I would always answer those that I wasn't that sleepy, when in reality I was. But again, if somebody else had gone with me, the answers probably would have been different. But again, as we just said, it's a blessing, because I think the outcome would have been a lot different if I'd had an advocate who didn't really understand this. So yeah, but I would say, for, again, narcolepsy or for any cognitive problems, always be mindful that that person probably knows exactly what was going on. Just because they can't talk doesn't mean that their minds aren't working. And it's lonely. It's really lonely.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I can only kind of relate this to an experience I've had that it's kind of, completely different experience, but when I was under a general anesthetic, and when I was coming out of that, I could understand everything that was going on around me, the discussions that were happening, but I couldn't open my eyes, I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything. But
Mm-hmm.
when I eventually came to and was talking to people, I knew everything that had happened over the last few weeks, and it's just that's quite a weird feeling to have people around you that think you've got no idea what's going on, and you actually do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad, I suspect, had narcolepsy. When I was diagnosed in 2000, he and I had lunch one day, and I was talking about it, and he's like, I think I probably have it. But at the time, I didn't realize my trajectory. And so I didn't realize, if I could go, the younger me would go back and say, you better go get diagnosed, because um, I was in 2000. By 2005, he was diagnosed with dementia, or atypical Alzheimer's. And it was atypical Alzheimer's because he didn't exactly fit the criteria, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I look back on my experience and, like, because my dad was clumsy. Um, like I was, he would drop stuff, and he would fall asleep anytime, anywhere, any place. And I remember that, but I reflected back when he was, I guess it was in 2007 or 8, when he was really losing touch with reality. And he would look at me and he'd say, I am so sorry. He said, I know who you are, but I can't think of your name. And I'd say, it's okay, Dad. And it's funny because I said to him, I understand. And I did. I did understand, but I didn't realize why I understood. But anyway, so he ended up passing. But
Yeah.
yeah. So again, I think about that and I'm like, dang, that could have been me.
Mm.
So my hope is to make it to 100 and leave this world the way I came in. Good push.
So, um, for someone thinking about starting carnivore, what would you recommend? What would your advice be to them?
My advice, really, to anybody is start with keto and work your way down. Unless you are just 150% convinced and sold on it. I think that particularly if you're struggling with cognitive difficulties, here's one thing that I recognized. I lost my taste for everything but sweet. So when I first started keto, meat tasted so gross to me. Just gross. And it took a while to develop that taste. And I actually baked a lot of sweets. So I would bake I'd make the cream cheese, what are they called? Yeah, cream cheese pies. And I would make cookies and I would make cakes. And I called those meals because that's all I wanted. That's all that tasted good. And then I just slowly started adding in the meats and trying to figure out the seasonings I liked. So I think it depends on where you're starting. If you're starting from a place where you're just trying to metabolically get yourself in a good place, carnivore is a great place to start. If you're starting in a place where cognitive difficulties are causing some challenges, or you have really lost that taste for meats, that keto might be a better option, and then just work your way down. So I think it just is so individual. I think if someone had told me carnivore to start off with, I would have never done it. I would have never. Um, I just I had to kind of ease my way into it.
Nice. So Mary, is there some way that people can reach out to you? Do you have social media or a website or something?
I do have a social media account on Instagram. It's MHB Health Coach. That's my Instagram. The all of my other links, I'm just going to say all of my other links are on my Instagram account. So if you go to the Linktree account, you're going to find them all. I do have a website, but I don't have the unique website name. So it's just easier to go to Linktree to find that. I do have TikTok, which is MHB Health Coach, and I have a Thread account with the same name, Facebook account with the same name, and Twitter. But I'm most active on Instagram.
No worries. I'll link to those below.
Okay,
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience, Mary. I really appreciate it.
for having me. I genuinely appreciate your time too. So anybody out there struggling with narcolepsy, with Hashimoto's, I've been talking about that, but Hashimoto's and cognitive difficulties. Goodness gracious, yes. Don't waste time. Don't waste time. I tell anybody, the minute you start realizing that you can't remember something, you're done. It's time to get serious and go high fat. However you can go high fat, go high fat. But carnivore, I think, is definitely the preferred route. But if keto is the best you can do, then go for keto.